over the Arabian Peninsula as well as what is called Greater Syria. And we will give you freedom when the First World War is over with. They also made agreements amongst themselves, France and England, that they would divvy up the area amongst themselves. And finally, they also made an agreement with some very prominent Jews in the British establishment that they would help create a homeland for Jews in the Holy Land. This was called the Balfour Declaration, which was declared in 1917, just before the end of the First World War. Well, when the war ended, they didn't keep their promises. They were in a fix in a way. They made so many promises that were not consistent with each other. They divided up the area, and England had what was called the Mandate of Palestine. That included what is called Transjordan and present-day Israel-Palestine. According to the League of Nations 1922, a mandatory power was supposed to make sure that the indigenous people become well able to control their affairs. At that time, the population of Palestine was largely Muslim and Christian, 92%. The Jews in Palestine were about 8%. These Jews were long-time residents of the area, and they were they were mixed in with the population, and we all got along quite well together. Having friendships was not unusual between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. When the mandate began, Palestine was what is called a Class A mandate, had all the rights and obligations of a country, just like the other countries. However, England had other plans for Palestine because of the Balfour Declaration. They facilitated the large immigration of Jews from Europe into Palestine. I will come back to this in a few minutes, and I want to concentrate my comments on Jaffa, which is where I was living when we had to leave. I was born in Jerusalem, and my father moved his family to Jaffa when I was 2 years old, which would be about 1941. Now, one of the talking points, propaganda points by some early Zionists was that Palestine was a land without any people, for a people without a land, meaning there was no one there, and the Jews of Europe needed a country, and so this was the ideal place. Well, what you see here is a colorized picture of Jaffa. We think either taken in the late 19th century or the early 20th century. As you can see, it was an urban area settled by Muslims and Christians. We didn't live in tents. We lived pretty much like the rest of you. The next picture is of what we call the Clock Tower Square. This was taken in 1914 by Masden. His collection of pictures is actually quite beautiful. As you see, the detail on there. And this was before the advent of many of the automobiles in Palestine. The reason I show this is when my father moved his business to Jaffa in 1941, he had an office in the Clock Tower Square. Here's another picture of Jaffa. This is 1922, about the time that England took the mandate. This is called the Al-Nusha neighborhood, and I chose this picture because when we moved to Jaffa, my father rented an apartment in this neighborhood while we were waiting for the house that we were to move into would be finished. Here's another picture taken later in the 40s. What you see here is the new City Hall, or what is called the Grand Sarai. And next to it is the Al-Hamra Theater, which was built in 1933. What you see here is what the British did to the old city of Jaffa in the 30s and the 20s. They claimed that they needed a large area to put their armaments, their jeeps, their tanks, and so forth. They needed a place to maneuver. So they blew up large parts of the old city of Jaffa, and in many cases they gave people only 12-hour notice. In some cases the houses had people in them. This is a map of Jaffa in 1948, and I'll show you as like the large section. The purple area is the old city of Jaffa, and this is that T-shaped area that the British cleared. by destroying all the homes there. My house, which I'll show you in a few minutes, is right here on the edge of the old city. And up here, I don't know if you can see this, there's a red dot, which is the church across the street, which I might mention, and this is the lighthouse, which I used to see from my bedroom at night. My school was a short 2 blocks away right here. And when I went back many times, I was astounded the school was so short distance away from home. I was never allowed to walk to school. I was always escorted by an adult or driven by a car. So in my childhood imagination, I thought school was very far away. The reason is it was dangerous on the streets. My brother told me that the Yeshuv, which were the precursor of the Zionist IDF, used to come at the foot of the street here and pepper the street with bullet fire. So my parents just couldn't let us out of the street. It was just way too dangerous. What you see here is the situation in 1947. The green area are areas that are owned by the Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians, and the white areas by Israelis, Jewish Israelis. Now, when the European Jews started coming into Palestine, their leadership never had the idea that they were going to incorporate themselves into the Palestinian society. They wanted the country for themselves. So their first aim was to get rid of the Palestinians by giving them money and asking them to relocate. They tried to make agreements with Italy to send Palestinians to Libya, or they tried to make agreements with the Ottoman Turks to send them elsewhere. It didn't work. The Palestinians, even though they were offered a large amount of money, didn't accept. So the next campaign was to buy as much land as possible, and by 1947, as you can see, they owned roughly 8 to 10% of the land. After the large immigration from Europe, by 1947, the proportion of Jewish versus Muslim and Christians was almost 33% Jewish, and the rest Christian and Muslim. When the Palestinians saw what was happening, they had a lot of uprisings. The worst one was in 1936 to 39, which was brutally put down by the British. By the way, the Israelis learned everything they do probably from the British. They learned a lot of lessons. They brutally suppressed this uprising, and when it was over with, they had killed about 5,000 Palestinians, and they either executed, put in prison, or exiled all the leadership, and they disarmed the Palestinians. The British had their fill. They decided they wanted to leave. The United Nations recommended partition in 1947, and this is the partition plan they recommended. The blue areas were supposed to be the Israeli part, and that was 55% of the land for 33% of the population. The buff parts were supposed to be for the Palestinians, which was 45% of the land for 2/3 of the population. Basically, they decided they're going to give land from the Palestinians to the Israelis.